Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Yes, the time has come. This is the Holy of Holies. This is a Kunos native Ferrari F2004 here in Assetto Corsa. The Ferrari 70th anniversary pack gave us the F2004. Of course, that was released nigh on 2 weeks ago now at this point. However, the pace of life means that, yep, now it's finally time for the review. Regardless, yeah, that's it. The Ferrari F2004. We have seen a lot of this car on this channel over the last couple of years, so I don't think it's really necessary to go into the nitty-gritty details on the history of this car, its technical specifications, all of that good stuff. However, I do not want this review to go any further without extending my greatest thanks, gratitude, appreciation, and admiration for ASR. ASR, as many of you know, have had the F2004 in Assetto Corsa for the better part of 2 years, long before Kunos ever even talked about the prospect of getting the F2004 into Assetto Corsa natively. ASR gave us multiple versions of that car. They were amazing. Absolutely top-notch quality stuff from the modding community. ASR, they were the benchmark for the Ferrari F2004 in Assetto Corsa, like I said, for about 2 years. However, Kunos now, finally, they got the message, and they have given us one of the most dominant Formula One cars of all time. With all of that said, though, well, what is this really worth? Predominantly, the console players are going to be ecstatic about having this car in the sim. Obviously, in the PC world, we're open to third-party mod development. We can download whatever we want. We can install and uninstall whatever we want. If you're playing on a console, though, you're stuck with whatever Kunos give you natively in the package and with whatever DLC they eventually turn out. That means that the F2004, the ASR car, has been a PC exclusive since its inception, and now, finally, with the 70th anniversary pack, Kunos are allowing the rest of the Assetto Corsa players out there, the console players, to experience the F2004. I don't know when the DLC for console will be released. However, it is coming, rest assured, and then you too will get the opportunity that we in the PC world have already had to experience this incredible car. In terms of what Kunos have given us here with the F2004, if you're familiar with the ASR version, you'll notice that this one looks pretty much the same as the ASR car, at least from the outside. You can see the brilliant modeling work, as always, that Kunos have given us, but aside from that, it really puts into perspective how good ASR did with that F2004 that they gave us. Externally, there really isn't much of a difference between those two cars, the ASR version and the Kunos version. Hats off to ASR, quite honestly. Kunos, as far as I am aware, have had access to basically confidential Ferrari data to assist them in developing this car for Assetto Corsa. And here's the product that they've come up with. It looks exactly like the F2004. ASR just working with videos and photographs and as much technical data as they could sort of surmise from the real world, they gave us a car that was also absolutely world-class. Kunos, with the factory backing from Ferrari, the blessing from the company to bring this car into Assetto Corsa officially, ASR, they did a really fantastic job given the relatively limited amount of information that they must have had in their development process. With that being said, though, there are quite a few differences between the Kunos car and the ASR car, and we'll go into them in a moment. However, just spinning around here in showroom view, let's take a look at some of the finer details on the exterior and interior of this F2004. Looking around here at the rear end, those of you who are familiar with the ASR car won't really notice any surprises or any glaring differences here. This is the Ferrari F2004, of course. It was one of the most complex cars of its era, and of course it was one of the most dominant cars of its era. Looking here on the rear end, you can see that massive diffuser. ASR did a really good job with this diffuser as well, and Kunos, well, they are also meeting and exceeding expectations on a regular basis. So there is that really complex geometry making up that diffuser in there. You can see three predominant elements of that diffuser, the outboard area of the floor, and then moving inboard we have a first level of the diffuser with the secondary tunnels on either side of the main tunnel down the center of the car just below the beam wing and the rain light assembly. Really, really cool stuff. Additionally, just looking across here on the shaded side of the car, great reflections across the bodywork as always, both optical and just plain old light reflections there, really nice. They're high quality, high definition, awesome, awesome, awesome. Additionally, you can see that paint finish there, just barely enough paint on these cars to cover the weave of the carbon. Very nicely done indeed. Looking around the side of the car here, we've got a profile view. There's that barge board work. I will say that Kunos have been able to bring in a few more, slightly more intricate details on this car than ASR managed to do. Most likely because Kunos had the opportunity to actually sit up there up close and personal with an actual F2004 or two. I've got to wonder exactly what that process is like for Kunos when they go to develop a new car for Assetto Corsa. But you can see here on the barge boards, as well as some of the panels here on the bodywork, you can see all of the fasteners there, very nicely modeled. Of course, pretty much every section of this car is removable and configurable for different circuits and different climatic conditions, so things need to be fastened and unfastened. You can see a lot of those mechanical fasteners in there. Very, very cool. One thing that is missing from this car, though, is the full tobacco livery. Of course, Kunos, they've got to market this product to the entire world, and there are different rules in different countries about what you can and can't advertise on screen. So no tobacco liveries, at least not stock anyway, here in Assetto Corsa on the F2004. In any video here on out that I make featuring this car or the ASR car is going to run in its tobacco livery in my videos, just so it's more easily distinguishable against the Kunos version. Anyway, having a look overall at the modeling detail. Well, it's a Kunos car. They've got a lot of experience doing this, and they have not disappointed. Just have a look at the front wing. Stark contrast to the front wing on the SF70H that we took a look at last week. This wing looks really primitive by comparison, but remember, this is 2004, this was all horsepower, and yes, downforce, but they did not quite have the carbon technology that we've got today to really hone those shapes and integrate them into a cohesive structure. So this is what Ferrari were able to do in 2004, and of course it was enough for the Drivers' and Constructors' World Championships. Be that as it may, we've got a triple element main plane here. We have a lower section, an intermediate section, and then an upper section. That lower section there, absent here, is that spoon profile that we would see in later years, really beginning in 2005, with the center section of that lower main plane dipping down in a U-shaped channel. That was to contravene the regulations, because in 2005 they raised the height of the front wings a bit to try and cut downforce, particularly underside downforce, but the teams contravened it and they made that center section of the wing lower to try and scoop up that air and funnel it underneath the car. However, that was not the case in 2004. You don't really see any big flick-up elements on this wing. We just have these three main plane elements, and that's about it. The end fence here, fairly complicated for the era. Still some resemblance to what we see in the modern day with that inverted U-channel on the extreme outboard side of the end fence. But aside from that, pretty simplistic by modern standards. Of course, you've got those big canard wings there with the Bridgestone logo on them. Very nice, just to help that air go around those front tires, cut down on that drag ever so slightly. Looking across the center section of the lower side of the front end, you can see the keel there. This is a single keel design. Again, as we have talked about before, back in this era, the teams really did not have the capacity to create those carbon suspension elements at really sharp angles, so everything had to be flat as far as those lower wishbones and really even the upper wishbones were concerned. So therefore, they made this protruding section, this bulbous section of the monocoque, come down a little bit below the top side of the under tray, if you will. It's the center section of the car here where the nose attaches to the chassis, and they mounted the wishbones there. Interesting solution. It did cut down on some underside aero efficiency, and by 2007 everybody had gone to the zero keel concept because they'd figured out how to make those angles a little bit more acute with those lower wishbones. However, you see this single keel, sometimes people call it a V keel concept in this era. Really, really cool stuff. Speaking of the rest of the suspension, of course, on the front end here, we've got a double wishbone push rod layout. This is ubiquitous in this era, and it's still ubiquitous today, at least on the front end. We've got double wishbone push rod on the rear as well, though. Most of the teams running pull rod configurations in 2017. Across the top of the car, here is where some of the details start to diverge between this version and the ASR version. You can see the hatches here across the top of the monocoque. These would be areas that the mechanics could access while working in the garage. They could make adjustments in the footwell there to the pedals or getting to the brake system, brake master cylinder, things like that. Kunos have done a very good job here with the shut lines with those hatches, but ASR, yes, they're there, but they're not quite as stark. I don't know if that's just got to do with the certain type of modeling software that Kunos uses versus ASR, or perhaps it's just the paint finish that makes those shut lines stand out a little bit more nicely, but they are apparent here as well as in the replays from the T-Cam. So yeah, I like that detail, definitely. Across the midsection here, you see those barge boards pretty much identical to what ASR had given us on their version of the F2004. You can see two predominant barge board elements below the front suspension, and then the main barge boards here with those serrated leading edges across their bottom surface. Very, very cool detail there, and that little winglet as well, just to condition the flow around the side pods as that airflow continues to move rearward. Radiator inlets on the side pods here, very, very nicely detailed in terms of their shape and size. I can't really see inside there if there are radiator matrices or not, but let's assume that there are. Definitely a nice touch, very true to life. Topside midships, there's the cockpit. The cockpit does look very different, I must say. Tremendously different, I almost wanted to say, but you be the judge on that from the ASR version. However, there's the cockpit detail, really nice. We'll go in the cockpit in just a little bit. Across the three-quarter view now, moving rearward, you can see the flick-ups here across the top side of the bodywork, just forward of the Fiat logos on the side pod there, and then of course the big scallop scoop spoon sections there across the rear tires just to help that airflow across the rear. See the reference plane, very nicely sculpted, very nicely detailed, and quite sharp in its edge profile there, as you can see. Looking across the back side of the barge boards, you can see how they're directing that air around the leading edge of the side pod there, trying to cut down drag, and of course all the time trying to pressurize and accelerate that air toward the rear zone of the car that we looked at before with that big diffuser. Wheel and tire detail, we'll have a better look at this on the front, but right now on the rear, nice detail on the rims and the wheel nuts as well as on the tires themselves. Bridgestone Potenza, of course, they were Ferrari's tire supplier back in the day, and of course they are groove tires with very nice textures there on the tread surface. Back to the front end here, we can get a better angle on the wheel detail here. Very nice colors and textures here on those BBS wheels with the red wheel nuts here on the left side of the car. Inside the wheels you can see the carbon brake discs and then the brake calipers as well. Capping off all of that detail though, you've got the valve stem cover there for adjusting tire pressure. Very, very cool. On the ASR version and also on the real car, there were blue wheel nuts on the right side of the car. Have Kunos copied that? Yes, indeed they have. Very, very cool. Great attention to detail, guys. However, we mentioned the cockpit before. Let's have a look at the cockpit. We'll fly in here across the side. And here we are in the cockpit of the F2004. We're sitting a bit high in here. We'll be sitting lower when we're out on track. However, let's just get our bearings and see what's what in here. The first thing that you'll notice in this car versus the ASR version is the steering wheel. The steering wheel in this one looks pretty different to the ASR steering wheel, and well, again, I have to believe that that is due to the access that Ferrari were able to afford Kunos in their research and development for this car. The dash here, of course, is that big steering wheel display. That is, as far as I can tell from photographs and any other sources, that appears to be exactly what Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello would have been seeing when they were in this car back in 2004 and the early part of 2005 as well. You'll get lots of information on that steering wheel display, and we'll go into that once we get the car fired up out on track. However, the other details on the steering wheel, the shift lights are completely different to how they are on the ASR version. The ASR car, the latest version, they scroll up from left to right, and then you change up when the green light on the right-hand side turns on. However, here, the shift lights, they scroll up from inboard to outboard in sequence symmetrically, and then you get two green lights on the outboard sides there, and that's when you change up through the gears. Again, we'll go through all of that once we're out on track. The other details here on the steering wheel, very nice modeling of all of the switches and buttons and rotary switches and the other ancillary screens that you get here. Additionally, in the cockpit, you've got more detail across the left-hand side of the bulkhead. Remember, 2004, yes, we are firmly in the digital age, but there are still some concessions made to analog switchgear. You can see there on the left-hand side of the car, you've got a button for the looks to be the emergency marshalling clutch. Pop the car into neutral even if it's lost hydraulic pressure. You've got a rain light switch. You've got a map switch for wet to dry, I believe, if you change tire compounds. You've got fire extinguisher and an interesting little decal there. It's partially blocked by the steering wheel, but there is a switch, and then immediately above it there's a blue and white sticker that says heated visor. I've never seen that before on a Formula One car, and I don't know if that's a system through the electrical umbilical that carries the driver's radio signal into his helmet. I don't know if Schumacher or Barrichello ran a helmet that had a heated visor, in other words, to help it with misting or fogging up in high humidity or low temperature, things like that. I do wonder what that heated visor was. It wouldn't make much sense to heat the little windscreen at the front of the cockpit there, just looking forward over the sill, but I've got to believe that's probably for the helmet visor. I've never heard anything about that, but I would not be surprised if such a thing existed. After all, this is Formula One. This is the world of excess. Across the left-hand side of the cockpit here, across the bulkhead, you can see the Ferrari chassis plate, as always, and then I don't quite want to call it a Formula One homologation sticker, but you can see it is an FIA homologation sticker for 2004. 2004 FIA Grand Prix. Pretty sure that would have said Formula One in real life. However, that would involve Kunos with the Formula One license, and we all know that Codemasters have had the monopoly on that for the last 7 years, so yeah. Call it Grand Prix. Whatever. Across the bottom side here, there's the seat. Very nicely modeled, I must say. No Alcantara covering or anything on the seat, just bare carbon. You can see it's adorned with the seat belts, quite obviously. You can see the weave in the seat belts, as we remarked about on the SF70H. Really, really cool. Additionally, here on the right-hand side, the low side of the cockpit, you can see some jacks where I believe some electrical lines or maybe the drinks line would be plugged in there on the lower right side. And additionally here, right next to the seat, basically right where the driver's shoulders would be, you can see 3 more umbilicals. When drivers get out of the car, quite often we see them unplugging things from the car. So I've got to believe that those little lines there are where those radio connections, drinks connection, or that heated visor connection, if that is actually a thing, would go into. Very nice detail. I've not yet seen that on any other Formula One car, mod or native Kunos material. Looking along the back side here, there's the air snorkel adorned with the T-wing with the camera mount inside. You can see that camera lens there. Very, very nicely done, guys. Across the other side, sunlight falling on us now. Very, very cool. Additionally, you can see jacks on this side. Now, I don't know if those are, again, like I said, are they for the radio system, the drink system, that potential heated visor system? I don't know. Or are they fasteners of some sort? I don't quite know. I think that would be a really bad place to put fasteners exposed like that, considering what can happen in an accident. Driver's head bounces around, his shoulders bounce around. That would hurt a lot if you were pressed up against that with any sort of speed or pressure, but yeah. Anyway, interesting little detail. I have to do a little bit more research on all of that. However, that about covers us in the cockpit. Again, we will be sitting much lower in here, but you do get an overall sense of the proportions and the sight lines through here. Coming out of the cockpit once again, we'll take one last look here at the Kunos Ferrari F2004. Very, very nicely done. And certainly this, alongside the SF70H here in the 70th anniversary pack, this is definitely the kind of car that we have all been waiting for here in Assetto Corsa, particularly you console players. So, again, I don't know when the console release date is going to be, but please hold on tight, because when it comes, you're going to love it, and we'll probably never hear from any of you again. So enjoy my review while you can. Speaking of reviews, though, yep, part 1 is done. We've got to begin part 2, which of course is the on-track action. Today, we're going to go someplace where we haven't gone for a review in quite a while. We're going to go to Monza. I normally don't go to Monza because it's not really a cornering circuit, and these Formula 1 cars, they're all about speed through the corners, so I like to show you the performance potential there. But I've done several review pieces already on the F2004, and we've taken it to places like Imola and Mugello. So let's take it to Monza. We'll set it up for some straight line speed. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about this one versus ASR, and we'll have some fun. See you at Monza in a few moments.
Welcome to Monza. Before we go out on track, of course, we're going to have a look through the setup screen and show you what's what on the Kunos Ferrari F2004. Here on the gear screen, here is the gearbox. Unlike the SF70H, which has fixed gearing, we can play to our heart's content with this 7-speed gearbox here. We've got all 7 gears plus the final drive ratio, fully adjustable any way you like. The default values are shown here. We are in default setup for the moment. Tire screen, we default to the medium compound. However, we also have the softs and hards to choose from. Default tire pressures are 10 psi. They go all the way down to 6 and all the way up to 28 psi, so you can play around with your tire pressure values as much as you desire. Fuel, we default to 80 liters loaded into the car. We've got it down to 0 here to turn the engine off. However, maximum fuel capacity is all the way up here at 150 liters. Of course, there was refueling in this era of Formula One, so do plan your pit stop strategy accordingly. Electronics, traction control. Back in 2004, they did run traction control, so I will be running it here for our review piece. Defaults to 4. You can turn the system off by turning it to off, quite obviously, which is the 0 value, and then you have steps going all the way from 1 to 10. 1 being the most assist, 10 being the least assist. We'll keep it at 4 here, default value. Aero, pretty simplistic here, front and rear wings, and that's it. Defaults at 14 on the front and 25 on the rear. We go down to 0 on the front and all the way down to 5 on the rear. Maximum rear wing angle is 35 degrees. Maximum front angle there is 30 degrees, so you can adjust those wing flaps accordingly. You don't actually see the flaps changing their angle on the car visually, however the effects, of course, are modeled. Alignment, camber, and toe on all 4 corners. Default values are shown here. Dampers, your fast and slow bound and rebound settings here. Again, all default values on all 4 corners. Drivetrain, differential adjustments here. Power, coast, and preload. 20% power locking, 30% coast locking, and then the 2% preload there, or the step 2 preload rather. It's not a percentage. It is 2 out of 20. So, yep, there's your percentage value there if you want to calculate it. I'm not going to be bothered. Generic brake bias and brake power settings. Defaults to 55% to the front axle, and then, of course, brake power defaults to 100%. Your heave dampers, these are the third springs to control the moments of inertia up and down, or in heave, in those moments over the bumps or cresting hills, things like that. Default values are shown. Suspension, the advanced settings here, the Packer rates and travel ranges on all 4 corners, and then the main suspension screen. Lots of suspension adjustments on these Formula One cars as always. Here on the main screen we have anti-roll bar front and rear, your wheel rates and ride heights there as well. Additionally to your heave rate there on the third spring, your wheel rates. Very, very cool. And of course the pit stop strategy screen is ubiquitous for every car in Assetto Corsa. What we're going to do here is load up the default setup, and then we're just going to go out for our first run on default. Default fuel load, slick tires, 10 psi all the way around, 80 liters of fuel. All right. Now in the cockpit of the F2004 here in the Monza pit lane, everything is alive and we can go through the instrumentation here on the steering wheel. However, the most obvious difference between this and the ASR car is, well, look at where we're sitting. We're sitting a bit higher and very much farther forward than we do in the ASR version. I have to believe that this is to better simulate your frontal vision when you're sitting in a car like this. In the ASR version, you sit a bit lower, you sit a bit further back. In your field of view in the ASR car are both of your wing mirrors. In this one, you can't see any of the wing mirrors, and you're just looking at the steering wheel rather close up, and then you've got a great view of the circuit. I don't know if this is a little bit high relative to the eye point where a driver's head actually would be, but this is the default seating position. Additionally, though, you can see the steering wheel is all alive as the car is fired up. Across the top of the steering wheel in the LCD, we're going to have a delta to our last lap, and then we have a lap counter in that right-hand box showing 1 right now because, well, that's what lap we're on. In the middle of the display, the black bars there with the white lettering, RPM, and then you see 4,000 across the second bar there, the bottom one of the black bar pairs. That's engine RPM, quite obviously. In the boxes on the left-hand side of that LCD, you see a 97 and a 75. I'm not entirely sure what that 97 is showing us, but the 75 I'm pretty sure is oil temperature, or maybe water temperature, probably water temperature. I'm going to say oil temperature, then is the 97 there. In the middle of the lower section of the steering wheel, you can see a 0. That is our gear indicator, believe it or not. We're in 0 because we are in neutral. You can see as we row up through the gears, that changes to 1, 2, 3, etc., 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 all the way up to 7, and then down through the box, neutral, 0, and then reverse as well. Very, very cool. To the right of that, the number 4, that's actually our traction control setting. You see we're in 4 out of 10 right now. If I ratchet the traction control up, it changes to a 3, 2, 1, and then it changes to 0 if I turn TC off, and then it displays 10 if I go to the lowest TC setting with still having TC active. Below that, you see 4.4. Still not entirely sure what that is. Could be tire pressure or temperature, not entirely sure. And the 3.9 similarly on the opposite side, the left-hand side. Still not quite sure. We'll keep an eye on those values as we're going out here. And then, of course, in the center of that lower bar of the display, that is our speed readout. That's going to read out in miles per hour for us. Below the main Ferrari Manettino switch in the center of the wheel, that is our fuel level, so 80 liters remaining. And then the lowest display on the steering wheel, that would normally be active. You can see it there as I turn the wheel around, but it is blank, and it remains blank for, I believe, the entirety of the run, so that never is operable, interestingly enough. Aside from that, though, you can see great cockpit detail in here. There's that heated visor decal that I noted in showroom view. It's gotta be for the helmet visor, I would guess, but there it is. Interesting little detail. Enough talk. Let's get out of the pit lane here on default setup for our first run here in the F2004. So, coming out of the pit lane and on to the racetrack. In the 7th gear here. Get some heat in the brakes and in the tires. It is a very nice early morning here at Monza. Time to drive an F1 car. We are not giving it full beans, as you can readily tell. However, you can hear those sounds, and, well, they sound pretty much identical to the ASR sounds, the internal sounds as well as the external sounds. ASR did a really fantastic job on their sound package, and, well, it sounded just like the F2004, so how much different could Kunos really make the sounds here while still being authentic? Not much. When we're at speed and we're really giving it the full beans and shifting up right at the red line, you will hear there's a little bit more of a distinct crackle on the upshifts, a little bit of a wobble there as the throttle's cut and then the gearbox slams up into the next gear. But aside from that, it's a virtually identical sound to the ASR version. Default setup here, you can probably tell we've got very short gearing. We're not going to get anywhere near the 200 plus mile an hour top speed of this car that we should be getting here at Monza on default setup, but I just want to show you the default setup anyway. So let's give it the beans, down start finish. There's that crack on the upshift. And we are just running into the red line now. 193, 194 miles an hour at 18,750. That's where the rev limiter is in this thing. Acceleration is good enough, but we don't have that top end speed, which is so critical to a good lap time here at Monza. The corners feels absolutely great. Car feels alive. I get great communication between the tires and the steering wheel there. The ASR car, in terms of driving feel, a lot of people have said that the tires feel like they're made of rock, and well, I kind of agree with that. However, for a third-party effort without official Ferrari data, as far as I'm aware, that ASR F2004, it's a good car. It really is. I'm not trying to detract from them in any way. I don't think it's exactly a fair comparison, to be perfectly honest, because they didn't have Ferrari data, and we have to assume that Kunos did. Now start finish. Time to get annoyed at the lack of straight line speed. Of course, this is the default setup, and they have gone for a compromise on all circuits. They have to assume that a lot of players are just going to want to jump into this car at any circuit and, well, not want to do any setup work. They just want to get up to speed in this thing as quickly as possible. So it's a decent compromise between straight line speed and cornering efficiency. However, this is Monza. We can trim this thing out quite a lot. Do have to say here, running through the trees, in the middle sector here of the lap at Monza. I love how the light falls across the cockpit. I love the sharp shadows that you get across the steering wheel and across the top of the bulkhead. It's a really, really nice graphical package on this thing. Yep, as you can see, hitting the rev limiter there. This is not a lot of fun, particularly. It's got some heat at the tires now. Brakes, of course, are well up to temperature. This is what default setup does at Monza. It's not your friend. Bouncing off the rev limiter all the time, the poor V10. You can see, though, the shift lights, we talked about that in showroom view, they're very different from the ASR shift lights. I think these are more realistic in terms of how the actual car operated, looking at onboard video from the era. You definitely see green lights come on both sides of the steering wheel at the same time, at least with Schumacher's onboards, before he upshifts. Barrichello, he apparently had a different sort of system on his car because you only see one side come up with the green light before he changes up through the gears. So that certainly would have been customizable according to a driver's preference. Schumacher liked to have some symmetrical shift lights as far as I can tell. Barrichello generally did not, but you really wouldn't know anything about that unless you wanted to go ask Rubens Barrichello. Let's dive into the pits here because I'm sick of bouncing off the rev limiter. That setup, we'll change the gearing, we'll change the wing angles, we'll do a lot of stuff here to get this car up to speed properly. So let's dive back into the garage here. Let's load my very much work in progress setup here on this car. You can see I have adjusted the gearing quite significantly, not so much in the lower ranges, but in the top end, yep, we've got greater top speed here, 214 miles an hour, theoretical top speed. You will notice that there is a big straight line speed deficit in this car relative to the ASR version, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I don't know if ASR took their power figures from what they were at the end of 2004, and Kunos took their power figures from what they were at the beginning of 2004, or, even more intriguingly, this car still runs. Believe it or not, the F2004 is still run several times during the year at Corse Clienti sessions. Ferrari have a program where very wealthy clients can actually buy their old Formula One cars and then drive them at racetracks around the world, all supported by Ferrari. The cars are shipped around the world just like they were when they were racing, with a full complement of mechanics, spare parts, tires, all kinds of things, and they run the cars essentially in race trim as they were back in the day. However, the big difference in a Corse Clienti session versus what these cars would have been doing back in 2004 when they were racing is they do restrict the revs a little bit on these engines just to try and give them a little bit more reliability and a little bit more time between rebuilds. That means that if this engine, let's say the ultimate red line was 19,000 RPM, in the Corse Clienti sessions they won't be revving them much past 17,000, 17.5, just for more reliability, because an engine rebuild on one of these Formula One engines is a very expensive proposition, and these clients, although many of them are extremely wealthy, they still don't want to be shelling out that much cash all the time to keep these cars in running order. So I don't know if Kunos took their power figures from an F2004 in Corse Clienti spec, or if Ferrari gave them the data from 2004. Nonetheless, we do have a straight line speed deficit on this car relative to the ASR version. Some of that could also be down to aero efficiency and things like that, so I don't want to single out engine power as the only variable, but it does seem to be one of the more obvious possibilities. For this run here, we'll be running on the softs. We've got less fuel on board. We'll have less fuel on board. So let's take it to 40 liters. same traction control settings. We have taken down the front and rear wing significantly. Really doesn't hurt cornering ability, but we do gain that straight line performance. Can probably take off a little bit more wing as well, but we'll leave it where it is for the moment. And then everything else I have not really changed at all. A little bit more diff power and coast, a little bit more leeway there before it all locks up. Aside from that, everything is still stock. It feels pretty good. So back into the cockpit of the F2004. Now let's really give it the beans. Definitely not running out of gearing before we hit 190 miles an hour anymore. That is certainly what we should be getting. Still got good XL out of the slower corners, but wind it out a little bit longer now at the top end. That's what you need. Love that shadow falling across the car here through Torre Grande. Pedarugia, and now unleashing it into the second sector. Still got to get heated to the tires, of course, so there will be a bit of understeer, as you can see. Second Lismo. There's a lot of that run out. Underneath the banking, up toward the Ascari chicane. 200 miles an hour on the brakes, throw the car in. Very responsive across the front axle. You can definitely tell that this is a Schumacher car. On the brakes for Parabolica. A little bit of a bump there, right in the braking zone. Can unsettle the car a little bit. Then you launch it out of the corner, down start finish, and you're on your way to another lap. 200 miles an hour. ASR version will be doing almost 230 miles an hour by this point, but not the case here. And again, I'm not entirely sure why. Getting some style points there for kicking up a little bit of dust. No problem. Murdering the gearbox there. Traction control helping a lot there through the second Lesmo, no problem. And you can see the delta there ticking up in the upper left of the steering wheel, plus 0.75 or minus 0.75. We're going faster, that's what that means. Shot a little bit. Revs, 200 miles an hour brakes, and back hard on the power. You will notice with all the instrumentation we have in here, one thing that we don't have is lap time. So I have no idea what our lap times are right now. I know that we are going 5 thousandths of a second quicker so far on this lap than we were on the previous. However, I have no idea what that actually means, so no lap time for us. Of course, in the real world, in a race situation, you would have your engineer telling you what your last lap time was, but no instrumentation if you just want to find out by yourself. So if you want to pull a Fernando Alonso, and then you say, I don't want any more radio for the race, please. Doesn't work. You have no idea what your lap times are then. Minus 0.38, 39. We're definitely on track to go quicker this time through. There we go, 0.61. Yep, time has fallen away. That's what we want. Now that everything is up to temperature and it's the way I like it, how does the car feel? Well, The biggest difference between this car and ASR's version from a driving standpoint is the tires really feel like they're alive on this one. You can definitely get very good feedback through your steering wheel here. My Thrustmaster TSPC definitely giving me some really good feels through that front axle. I know exactly where the car is, all four corners. I know exactly when I'm approaching a brake lockup situation. I know when I've hit the curbs too hard. Everything is transmitted with such high fidelity in terms of the force feedback in this car. It is phenomenal. That understeer definitely felt it. Up that grass definitely felt it. Certainly the tires on this one, that alone makes it a step above the ASR version. Again, that's just down to Kunos, and they have the factory ability, and that was very airborne. Pulled a Vitaly Petrov there. Oh well, my steering column didn't break. Success! Anyway, yeah, the tires definitely makes this car worthwhile just in terms of that. The feel is so much more precise than you get with the ASR version. The ASR version, you get a lot of very harsh force feedback, which doesn't feel out of place, but at the same time, it does take away from your overall feeling you get, particularly from the front axle. That's not a problem in this car. The brakes, they also feel a bit more predictable, a little bit more compliant in this version than they do on the ASR version. Pedal feels a bit more linear, and you don't really get feedback in terms of force feedback from the brakes here, but you get enough of the sensation of losing the speed from the force feedback in the steering that it's much easier to modulate your brake pressure in this car than it is in the ASR car, at least in my experience. In terms of things like the gearbox, well, it's a semi-automatic paddle shift box. Pull the paddle and you're in the next gear. No drama. There's really no hesitation in that system whatsoever. It's exactly what you would expect. I do like the upshift sounds though. They sound a bit better. They sound a little bit more visceral than the ASR version, and it just lets you know that, hey, you've actually done a gear change. Let's not go into the air here. Give a lot of berth to that curb. Very good. All in all, it feels very similar to the ASR version, but it feels better in terms of the overall tactile sensations you get. Again, a lot of it has to do with the tires, I am sure. Now, ASR, their version also ran on the Kunos V10 tires, but are they the same as what Kunos are really able to give us from a factory effort? I don't know. They certainly don't feel anything like the ASR tires, I'll tell you that much. The car's behavior over bumps, this one is a lot more compliant than the ASR version. The ASR car, it just twitches a lot over the bumps, and I mean, you can expect that because first of all, it's a Formula 1 car with effectively zero ground clearance, and it's got a very hard suspension setup and really aggressive suspension geometry, but this car feels a lot more compliant. I mean, it feels sharp. It feels just as sharp as the ASR version, but it doesn't feel like it's on that knife edge quite as much as the ASR car did. So all of that make it a whole lot more of a tractable driving experience for all of us. Although, as straight line speed aside, as I demonstrated in my comparison video between this car and the ASR version at Imola, this car is 0.6 off the pace of the ASR version. And I am pretty certain that all of that time was lost in a straight line. Down the start-finish straight at Imola, the ASR car is easily exceeding 210 miles an hour. This one just barely cracking 203, 204, so it doesn't sound like that big of a difference, but the acceleration in the ASR car is marginally better, and the top speed is quite a bit better. That over the course of the lap, even if this car, as I feel, is better in the corners than the ASR version, that's enough to lose about 0.6, I would say, straight line speed alone. In terms of the chassis dynamics, and this is where I'll sing the praises of ASR, well, this car, I think, Kunos version, is just about the same, if not ever so slightly better than the ASR version, but I think straight line speed aside, if you could equalize them in terms of straight line speed, this car and the ASR car would be doing identical lap times. You can see here 10 liters of fuel remaining. We've got our fuel warning light already. 11 laps here. Start thinking about a pit stop. Let's add 30 liters. Put another set of the super softs or soft tires on this. No super softs here. Pressures feel okay. Wing angle on the front feels okay. Can't adjust the rear in the pit stop. So yeah, we're set for a pit stop on this lap. In general, the overall feeling that this car is giving me, it's very tractable, it's very compliant. Like I said before, it doesn't feel like it's on the knife edge in comparison to ASR's version. I don't want to say it's easier to drive because it's not, but it's a different kind of driving experience. This one doesn't feel quite as frantic and frenetic as the ASR version. Here, selections are good. Some tires going on, pressures are fine, and a plus 30. Nice pit stop detail there. And off we go. Lighten up the rears. The red flashing light next to the L button there, that is for the pit lane speed limiter. Just really, what can I say? The SF70H, that is clearly the centerpiece of the 70th anniversary pack, but this is a very close second, I must say. And the fact that I was able to do within 0.6 of the same lap time as the ASR car, with the straight line speed deficit that this car has relative to the ASR version, that says something about how good a job ASR managed to do, because, I mean, it's effectively just as good in the corners as the Kunos version, made with real Ferrari data, in consultation with Ferrari. Hats off to ASR, really. That's the verdict on this car. Kunos did a really good job, but because Kunos did such a really good job, that means ASR really did a really good job. A couple of you probably wondering by this point, well, the driving position, it's pretty different in this one relative to the ASR car. What gives? Like I said, I think that is to simulate your overall forward vision in terms of where your head is in this car. Of course, in the real world, if you were sitting in this car, you'd have your peripheral vision. You'd be able to see your wing mirrors in your periphery. However, we can't do that yet on a sim. We don't have peripheral vision, as it were, in sims. So I think what they're doing here is they're just trying to simulate your primary forward vision in terms of what would be discernible from where your eyes are. Those of you guys who are running VR, this isn't a problem because you can just turn your head a little bit and, well, there's your wing mirror. But I have yet to convert over to VR. I've got to upgrade my hardware before I could even think about doing that, but I don't know. When I drove a Formula 2000 car, this is about what I saw in terms of the steering wheel, the view across the top of the monocoque. That's what I saw. I didn't see my mirrors in my primary forward vision. I saw the steering wheel and I saw the track. If I needed to see my mirrors, I turned my head. And that's what you would do in this car too. And, you know, watch the onboards of any Formula 1 driver and you're going to see that they turn their heads to look in the mirror. So their mirrors are not entirely in their forward vision, and well, we can't see them here, so I think it's a worthy compromise. Do I think the eye point is still a little too high? Possibly. It's hard to judge. You do sit lower in the ASR version, but you also sit a bit farther back on default. So again, is this too high, or is it just an artifact of sitting closer up? I don't know. But regardless, it seems realistic enough to me. It's not like I can see my own front wing from where I am. I can't see the bottoms of the front wheels. I can only see the upper wishbones on the front suspension, tops of my tires, and that's about it. And that appears to be realistic enough. Quicker on that lap. I still have no idea what my lap times are. Oh well. Of course, this is a problem you can rectify very easily by turning on the in-game app if you like that kind of thing, but I like to just see what the car wants to show me. I'm only running the pedals here for your benefit, so normally when I'm just running by myself, I don't have any instrumentation aside from what the car is showing me, so I'll figure out my lap times at the end. There is just something, though, about this car and this place, seeing the red bodywork all around, seeing the Ferrari logos on the steering wheel, knowing that you're at Monza in a Ferrari Formula 1 car, it's the best. It really is the best. I very nearly did the SF70H review here at Monza, but I wanted to show you more of the hybrid systems and the regen and all that kind of thing, and you don't have much of an opportunity for regen here at Monza. You have big braking zones, but you have relatively few of them, so, well, Imola was a better compromise for this. But this one, no hybrid systems, no DRS, no turbos, none of that nonsense. V10, about 950 to 980 horsepower, normally aspirated, 7-speed box, glorious sound. That's what this is. That's what F1 2004 was. Say the fuel consumption in this thing is absolutely voracious. We had 33 liters on when we started this stint. We have just over 13 remaining. Lap 17 in this session. So not even half of the race distance completed yet. That's a lot of fuel. Of course, back in these days, 2-stoppers and 3-stop strategies were not uncommon. Sometimes even 4-stop strategies happened and they were workable. Definitely get a sense of how much more efficient the Formula 1 powertrain has gotten even since 2004, which really wasn't all that long ago, all things considered. Of course, very different philosophy of car. This one's going for all-out horsepower, basically at no expense spared. Nowadays, people are concerned about fuel economy, things like that. Even though the power output figures, they certainly don't suggest fuel economy, but we talked about it in the SF70H review, Mercedes, with that 50% plus thermal efficiency on their Formula 1 engine. That's absolutely remarkable. I don't want to know what the thermal efficiency was on this V10, but it was nowhere near 50%, I'll tell you that much. Probably around 25 to 30% at absolute best. There's our fuel warning. We have about 2 laps left. The brakes into Escarre locked them up a bit. Puts me ridiculously out of position for the entire complex. Tires going off a bit. Left, you can just see it ticking down. Basically burning 1/10 of a liter every 2 seconds at top speed anyway. Left. 4.5, 4.3, brakes. 4. Just watch the gas gauge drop. Oh, it's not one for the environmentalist crowd. Then again, nor am I one for the environmentalist crowd. Sorry, guys. Race car. It's supposed to be fast, and fast it certainly is. We're going to back off here. We do not have enough fuel to complete another lap, even at very reduced pace. So what I'm going to do is turn off the TC. We're going to do a little bit of a spin turn. Drive back into the pits this way. All in all, I've got to say, it is so cool that Kunos were able to get this car officially into Assetto Corsa. Like I said, we've had it courtesy of ASR for quite a while, but that's only on the PC side of the world. You console players, and obviously you're a big part of not only Assetto Corsa's market, but a big part of the sim racing market in general. Now you guys finally get the opportunity to have a go in the F2004 as well. I don't know exactly when you're going to get it, but I do know that you're going to get it relatively soon. Certainly a whole lot closer than 2 years from now, which is basically as long as you've waited since ASR released their version of the car, of course, for PC only. But Kunos, they have really done a tremendous service to the Assetto Corsa community, finally bringing a V10 Formula 1 car into the game. And, well, hats off to them. I think they have done an absolutely tremendous job inside and out with this car. Just sitting here in the pit lane, you can see the wonderful shadows and reflections here in the early morning sunlight here at Monza. You can see the shadows of the chain link fencing there falling across the car. It's absolutely tremendous. In terms of external styling and detailing, we saw that in showroom view. They did a remarkable job, and you've just seen in terms of the driving experience. It's not as fast as the ASR car in a straight line, but again, I think if you equalized the top speeds, they'd be doing pretty much identical lap times. So really, hats off to ASR for the tremendous job that they did, for the tremendous contribution that they made to sim racing over the 2 years that we've been playing with their F2004. I do think the baton has been passed now. Kunos, with their full developmental resources, with the blessing of Ferrari, they brought this car into Assetto Corsa, and really, I don't think anybody's going to look back from here on out. ASR, they'll continue to go on to other things. I know that they are dumping a whole bunch of time and energy into some early 90s Formula 1 cars that we'll see from them pretty soon. However, in terms of the F2004, your reign is over. enter Kunos, enter this F2004. It's wonderfully put together, wonderfully crafted, and again, I think it's really a brilliant addition to the sim, and certainly it's a very appropriate venue to bring it out with Ferrari's 70th anniversary, the 70th anniversary pack released 2 weeks ago by Kunos for Assetto Corsa. If you don't have it by now, certainly get your hands on it as soon as possible. It's not going to break your bank, and it brings you a menagerie of wonderful content for Assetto Corsa. All Ferraris, of course, 2 Formula 1 cars, well, 3 Formula 1 cars if you count the 31267, plus an absolutely wonderful array of road and race Ferraris of yesteryear. However, that is all we've got for today in the review segment of this video. Of course, as always, hot laps are to follow. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Thank you all very, very much for watching, and thank you for your continued support and your engagement. Stay tuned for the hot laps, please. Until next time, though, Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much, and we will see you soon.